I thought we could maybe have a conversation about how can we help and support children with additional needs with their mental health. And I was listening to a podcast earlier on that explained that recent findings show that 41% of typically developing children now have good mental health, which means that 59% of children have poor mental health. So that means now that poor mental health amongst children is the norm, which I think is really shocking.
It is shocking, isn't it? Because I was saying to you earlier, wasn't I? It probably was the opposite when I was at school all those years ago. Mental health wasn't, like, poor mental health wasn't really a thing then, and now it's huge.
It seems to be almost like an epidemic now, doesn't it? It's growing, which is obviously something that we spoke about a little bit last week. But obviously that means something very significant for children who have additional needs, because their mental health has always been far worse in comparison to typically developing children. In fact, there was some research published by an organisation called Autistica back in 2016 that found that for people with autism, for example, their life expectancy is 16 years less than the neurotypical population. It's absolutely shocking. The leading cause of death in autism is epilepsy, because there's a high comorbidity. But the second leading cause of death in autism is suicide. And now I'm not sharing those statistics to shock, but I just feel like that provides an opportunity for us to recognize how important it is to look at our children's mental health, really understand it, put some support in place early in life. Don't you agree,
Yeah,
Michelle?
100%. It's always good to get in there early and nip it in the bud. And I always believe that prevention is far better than cure. So the earlier you can do this, the better for your child.
Yeah, for sure. So I thought it'd be useful if we just go through some of the key reasons why our children have poor mental health outcomes. And hopefully that'll give people food for thought about what they can do about it. The first area is around sensory processing difficulties. So many children with additional needs have sensory processing difficulties where they just find the stimulation, the noise and the smells and the sound and the bustle of around them, they just find it completely overwhelming. So that means that children who are going into those environments like a supermarket or going to school, for example, are more likely to have elevated levels of anxiety before they have to go to this place, and are likely to be at a very high stress level the whole time that they're there. So see, this means a lot of our children are going to school every day, stressed about going there, very stressed when they're there. But what they're trying to do is mask how stressed out their distress. They're masking that through the day. And they have to do that for multiple hours a day, several days in a row. So that can't be good for mental health, can it, Michelle?
No, not at all. And also, it's not going to be good for your physical health either, because if you're having elevated stress for prolonged periods of time, it's going to have a knock-on effect on your immune system, because, you know, what goes on up here has an impact on what goes on in here and throughout your body. It's all linked. So if you're constantly feeling a heightened sense of stress, this could be linked to why you might be experiencing more headaches or stomach aches, or, you know, often getting colds or flus, because it's like the stress levels are just way too high. So it's about trying to find ways to kind of bring that down.
Yeah, this is where a really good understanding about the sensory processing difficulties of your child is super important, so that you can think about how might that work best. One of the other areas that I know is really tricky for children with additional needs is the area of like social understanding, social communication, and all those like social relationships that go on. Many children, particularly those on the autism spectrum, have what's called poor theory of mind, which is a poor ability to understand something from somebody else's point of view. They have a very literal understanding of language. They have poor understanding of context. So they might have one behavior out in the playground, then not realize it's not really appropriate to have that behavior when you come back into the classroom. So you might call the teacher a funny or rude name in the playground, but we all understand you don't do that to their face. You know, our children might not really get that. And so there are a number of difficulties that our children have around their social understanding that mean that social relationships are very, very difficult for them. So that means that they, in their friendship groups, often struggle to maintain friendships and feel really good. So they can often feel outside of the group and not
Mm.
part of it, not wanted, and not really understand why. And that's also got to be tough, hasn't it?
Yeah, 100%. I was saying to Sue earlier about how I know when I was in secondary school, I really struggled to fit in and feel that sense of belonging. I always felt different, and I still feel different now. But knowing what I know now, and I've got people around me who I feel comfortable with, and I've found my tribe, and I'm okay with who I am. But when you're growing up and you're 13, 14, all the hormones are racing, going through puberty, it's much more difficult to think that or feel that. You just feel so outside of everything and so isolated. And when you feel like that, that's going to have a really bad impact on your mental health.
Yeah, for sure. And those teenage years, they're where you're really seeking your
Yeah,
peer group, really trying to understand your own identity and where you fit. That's super tough, isn't it?
totally.
Um, One of the other areas that I know is tricky for our children is around the area of play. Now, play is super important for children's development. I mean, there's loads and loads of research that shows how important play can be. But for our children, again, with the social difficulties they have, this can often be quite problematic. So I was just thinking earlier of the example of playing a game of it in the playground, where one child is it, everybody else runs away. The child who's it has to try and touch somebody, and when somebody's touched, they're it, and everybody runs away from them. So like the premise of that game is that one person who's it, you have to try to avoid them. They're sort of like unwanted. They're almost like unclean. You have to try to avoid being touched by them at all costs. So I can see why that would actually be quite problematic for our children who maybe feel like they're outside. They maybe feel like
Yeah.
they're not wanted. So it's easy to see why a lot of our children then seek solitude and
Mm.
seek comfort in video games, for example, where it's
Mm.
predictable.
Mhm.
You can replay something over and over again till you understand it. It's under your control.
Mhm.
Quite often children, especially on the autism spectrum, have very superior visual processing, so they can be extremely good at those things. And also in those video game environments, your social skills or lack of don't really matter so much.
Mm.
So it's interesting, isn't it? This whole question about play in video games. What's your take on that, Michelle?
So I think, well, we spoke about it last time about screen time and, you know, how long on screens is appropriate. And I think they did say that it's about 2 hours is fine, and then anything over 2 hours is too much. But I believe very much about everything in moderation. So the same way that we have treats every now and then, or, we might go out for a 5-hour walk, and then that enables us to be able to have a biscuit afterwards. As long as you're like doing things on a screen that, say, if you did it for an hour here and then you went and did some work, or you read a book, or you played with your dog, I think that's okay. But I think the problem lies when it's like constant, so you're just spending all day doing the one thing. That could be perceived as problematic, but as long as it's in moderation, I think it's okay.
Yeah, and I think a big part of the problem is that getting children to then end their screen time. This is a huge problem with the parents that I speak to. And I was actually listening to a professor of play in a podcast recently who's saying that they're looking into it and none of them have got the answers either. So it's just like
Yeah.
one of those things you're just going to have to like learn to live with, really. So
Yeah, and I can see why, because I think if it makes you feel relaxed playing these games and makes you feel good, you don't want to stop doing things that make you feel good. So it's about recognizing when it gets to playing it too much. So I know for myself, like I love playing. I've recently started playing Scrabble on my phone. I've never played Scrabble before in all my life. It's taken me to 37 to start playing it on my phone. And I absolutely love it. I play it first thing in the morning to last thing at night. But if I literally played it all day long, I don't think that would be healthy. But also I think I'd find myself getting quite bored. So it's just recognizing, okay, I've played it now for like an hour. I need to do something else. And for our children, for them to also realize, you know, 5 hours playing a game, it's perhaps a bit too much. There are other
yeah,
things we can do.
yeah, but I think that also for us parents, I think that it's worth giving really good consideration to how could we do this. Like some games have a very definite endpoint. So if your child's playing Fortnite, you know, you either win or you lose. You've got to the end of it. That's a good stopping point. There are
Hmm.
some games where you ascend in levels. So if you get to a
Hmm.
particular level, you can save your game. That's a good stopping
Yeah.
point. But there are other things like Minecraft, you know, you could be working on something and you never really get to the end of that. So it's just about thinking about how could we as a family build in a convenient stopping point for that. And also maybe reframing the way that we think about play. So instead of thinking about, oh, running around outside making mud pies is good play, and
Mm.
sitting in front of a screen, oh, very bad play.
Yeah.
So, just trying to maybe get away from that good and bad and just thinking
Mm.
about, like you say, just having a blend.
Yeah, totally. And I think just so long as you get outside for maybe 30 minutes of the day, that's good enough. I think, like I say, everything in moderation is the key.
Yeah, for sure. The final point that I wanted to make about one of the difficulties for our children in around mental health is around language. So I was just saying before, there's so much more awareness now about mental health problems, and people saying, oh, it's good to talk. And, you should just name it and say it out loud
Mm.
and find somebody to talk to. But that's a problem for our children because, first of all, many children on the autism spectrum, again, have a problem in recognizing their emotions. I think it's got a term, alexithymia, I believe it's called, when you're not able to recognize what your feelings are other than the basics of happy and sad, that kind of thing. But many children who have sensory processing difficulties also, one of the problems is being able to recognize their own internal states. So if you couple that with you have difficulties around language, so you can only really understand literal language, or you have problems processing verbal instructions or complex verbal sentences, that means that then if you're trying to explain how you feel, you also then need to be able to understand what somebody else's perspective might be so you can explain it to them in terms they understand.
Mhm.
That's enormously problematic. You can see that, can't you? How enormously problematic that is for children. So that means that this ability to talk about how you're feeling is not going to be a strategy that works as well for our children. I was just wondering, Michelle, if you've got any suggestions about, what alternatives could there be if you can't really talk through with your child about their feelings?
Yeah, certainly. So I think it's not just about, I think communication is key, but sometimes, like you say, that's not always the answer. And there are other ways. So movement is a great one. So I know for myself, if I go for a run, I often come back and I feel a lot better. I know people who do like weights, like my husband does weights and he goes and does that for a couple of hours and he comes back and he just feels, alive. Like people who do boxing or like dancing, like they're shaking out their emotions in a way. They shake out any sort of bad energy they've got, they shake it out. That's really positive. So it's not all verbal. There are other ways that we can feel good, like go for a nice dog walk or have a relaxing bath or so many things. Some people find it through meditation and mindfulness. Like loads of different things you can do that take you out of this kind of precognitive state and transcend it, and then you just feel relaxed. But you just need to find what works for you. So for one person it could be mindfulness, but for someone else it might not be that at all. It could be like reading a book or being with their family or whatever. So whatever it is for you, we're all like no one size fits all. Find what it is for you and do that.
I think that's great advice. And also because so many of our children, what's relaxing for them or helpful for them might look totally weird. It might be like hanging upside down, or it might be finding a tiny space to squeeze themselves in. So I think that's where it's really useful to have this thought, for adults to have this thought about what is my child doing to like make themselves feel good, and
Exactly.
is that actually healthy, and just like observe that and try to help them to find a balance to feel comfortable.
Yeah, exactly. And being okay with it, because we're all unique. And so like what one child might find helpful, another child might not, but that's okay. We're all different, and that's what makes us beautiful.
Most definitely. So should we just have a little summary then of here's some of the points that you and I have come up with that we think can be super helpful.
Yeah.
For me, the first point has got to be get a good understanding of your child's sensory needs and make sure they've got the right support. It might be that you could do that just by observing them and seeing what they're doing and helping them with that, and then maybe having conversations with other adults to support them, but that's super important.
Yeah.
How about you, Michelle? What do you want to say is a good point?
So I think what is really key, especially in this COVID time, when we're a lot more sedentary because we can't really go out as often, it is actually about movement. So, you know, whatever it is for you, whatever way movement works, it could be doing the weights, or it could be doing, obviously the children might not want to be doing the weights, but going for a run, doing some dancing, doing some yoga, just like moving the body, because the body's not built to just sit or lie. I often find if I'm too sedentary, I can feel quite down because my body's just like, flat. So it's about getting out into nature, going for a walk, whatever it is that works for you, do more of that.
Yeah, and although you're saying that, oh, children might not want to do weights, one of the things that I often did with it as a teacher when I had very bouncy children that needed that was I would give them a backpack to carry, but I'd put quite heavy things in it, like a massive bottle of squash filled up to the top. And I know it sounds really mean, but actually it was really helpful. So it's just a creative way of finding how to add weight into to help with that process of calming down. So so whole body movement with resistance, and even better if it can be outdoors. That's a good point.
Yeah, and I think I read somewhere about there's these like weighted like you can heat them up in the microwave and put them, and that's really good for kids with additional needs. It calms them down, so like put that on their forehead or wherever. I use that a lot with the children I've worked with additional needs, and they really love that. But also just get rid of all the energy, like after a day at school, taking them out, letting them play football, going for a run, whatever. So they've got rid of all that energy. So when they come in, then they can relax, rather than coming in with all that energy and expecting them to be relaxed. As if they've got all that energy, they need to find a way to release it.
Yeah, definitely. One of the things we often say is that our children, they've been suppressing their needs all day long and living with these high levels of stress. So when they come out, they're like a shaken up bottle of Coke, and you open the lid and bang, they're all over the place. So that's why that, getting out and moving is a really good way to blow off steam. One of the other points I wanted to mention as well about how to help children with mental health is thinking about language, and make sure that as adults we don't overwhelm them with loads of chatter, but using short sentences and using literal language. I think that's really, really important too. Mm-hmm. So one of the other points that we'd been talking about was around pets, wasn't it, Michelle? Yes. Yeah.
I found that so useful. So I never used to have pets when I was growing up as a child, and I never really liked animals, not disliked animals, but I wasn't really into animals. It's only now as an adult in my 30s, got a cat, then got a second cat, then got a dog, and I absolutely love animals now, adore animals. And the benefit of having animals for a child is just huge. You can learn so much from your animals, like things to do about unconditional love, having responsibility, looking after something that isn't you, and they give so much. So for a child, especially a child with additional needs, it's the perfect medicine or antidote for sure.
Yeah, well, and I think everybody knows that I've got 2 dogs and I'm soppy mad about them, but actually they really have had a transformative effect on our family life. So I would always say get a dog, but not everybody can. I get that, but just just having a pet, I think, is a really good idea.
Yeah, for your mental health for sure. I was thinking when we were talking about the movement side of things, that's great, but some children, like we say, that's not really for them, so they might find their calm through doing something more solitary. So it could be gaming, it could be reading a book, it could be playing Scrabble, it could be doing a puzzle, so yes, do some movement, but for some children, if they've got all that energy, they might need to get it out in a different way. They need to find their calm in a much more sort of solitary, calming way. That's their way of doing it, and that's okay. So find out what it is for them, and it could be a creative way. So it could be drawing, it could be anything that takes them, like a form of escapism. So it takes them out of here, away from it, and transcends it, and then they find their peace.
Yeah, good point. And actually, that resonates with me because the things that we have been doing to get by and find that calm, obviously, like the rest of the world, we've been doing a lot of cooking and baking. But we've also in our household discovered the joy of knitting as a
Oh,
calming activity, keeping us away from passive scrolling on social media, and actually creating something is so rewarding. It makes you feel really good when you've knitted a little square and you feel like you're going to knit jumpers for everyone for Christmas. It's a really good thing to try. Yeah,
brilliant.
so one other thing that I wanted to say is try to just observe your child, listen to them, think
Mm,
about what they're saying, what they're doing,
yeah.
and then maybe you can wonder out loud about things. So, our
Mm,
children are not perhaps really as good as we would like them to be at telling us how they feel and what they need and why they did this.
yeah.
Um, and so I think, the onus is on us really to observe and think and listen, and wondering out loud is a really good way, because you'll know if you've said the right thing, you'll get a response from it at some point or other. So I think
Mhm.
that's a really good strategy for people when thinking about supporting children's mental health.
Yeah, no, definitely. Like I was speaking about this just earlier today, actually, about how it's about kind of like being like a detective. You've got to be like a detective when it comes to being a parent. You're like investigating, okay, what is it that triggered that? Like trying to find little things, like little patterns that emerge, and you're kind of like figuring it out for your child, because your child might not be developed enough yet to realize what it is yet, or can't express it, so you're trying to figure it out for them, and then you, like you say, you're wondering out loud, like, I wonder whether it has anything to do with this, and then they can be like, yes, maybe. So yeah, it's teamwork.
Yeah, and that sort of reminds me as well, really, about something I was listening to also, that showed that if you have a parent who is anxious, the child is twice as likely to have a problem with anxiety.
Mm,
Um, so I think that's really significant about, the starting point for many of us, and myself included in this, has had to be around, well, what am I doing that actually is feeding into this anxious, behavior, this sort of poor mental health of my child, and being really questioning about that.
yeah, no, totally. Like when I first started to Find Your Spark, it was way back when, like 10 years ago, and it was predominantly for young people to help them with their well-being. But it was in so doing that I realized actually a lot of the issues that children came to me with actually originated with the parent, and the child was trying to, make sense of it for themselves. And I found, okay, well, if I work with the parent, I'm probably going to have a much bigger impact, and further reach, because the parent will be far more developed to understand what it is that I'm trying to do. And I have noticed that actually in it, and now I work predominantly with parents, and I love it, absolutely love it. I feel like I'm making a real difference.
Yeah, I feel the same. We do the same at Maze. I've worked with children for years and years and years, but I love watching parents having this sort of real understanding, develop a really
Mm,
deep understanding of the needs of their child. I'm feeling really
yeah,
confident about how to manage that.
yeah,
And yeah, I think that's totally a transformative experience.
yeah.
So this feels like the end of this conversation, but it feels like the start of a new one, Michelle. So maybe we could revisit the topic of family wellbeing next time we speak.
Sounds good.
All right, then. Well, thanks for today, and we'll speak again soon. And next time we'll talk about family wellbeing.
Yay, I look forward to it.